"Get out of my mess hall, Navy trash." The words exploded across Camp Pendleton's crowded cafeteria like a grenade. Corporal Derek Mason's palm cracked against Elena Vance's shoulder before she could turn around. Her tray launched forward meatloaf mashed potatoes, green beans crashing across the floor in a spectacular mess. 200 Marines watched. Nobody moved. She was 30 years old, 5'5", and looked like someone's quiet sister visiting for lunch. Mason saw weakness. What he couldn't see was the classified SEAL badge locked in her footlocker, or the 7 years she'd spent making America's enemies disappear. If you're watching from a military town tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe now and stay until the end, because what happens to Mason will change everything you think you know about judging people by appearances. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. Elena Vance stood motionless, mashed potatoes sliding down her Navy working uniform, her tray spinning on the floor 3 feet away. The mess hall had gone completely silent. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto her back. Derek Mason stood behind her chest, puffed out, waiting for the reaction he'd been craving for 6 weeks. "You deaf squid." He stepped closer. "I said, get out. This is a Marine mess hall. You don't belong here." Elena turned slowly. Her face showed nothing. Not anger, not fear, not embarrassment. Just calm assessment, like she was calculating wind speed before a shot. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I need to clean this up." Mason blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere until you apologize." "Apologize for what? For existing on my base?" He grinned at his audience. "For taking up space real warriors need." 3 tables away, Staff Sergeant Miguel Torres set down his fork. He'd spent 18 months attached to JSOC units in Syria. He recognized something in the way this Navy woman held herself. The stillness, the economy of movement, the way her eyes had already mapped every exit in the room. "Mason," Torres said quietly. "Let it go." Mason whipped around. "Stay out of this, Torres. This doesn't concern you." "I'm just saying. I said stay out of it." Torres held up both hands and sat back, but he kept watching. Something was very wrong here. Something Mason was too stupid to see. Elena bent down and started picking up her scattered food. Mason watched her for a moment, then kicked the tray across the floor. "Did I say you could clean up? Did I give you permission?" She straightened slowly. Still no expression. Still nothing but that flat, measuring gaze. "I don't need your permission." "What did you say to me?" "I said I don't need your permission to clean up food I paid for." Mason's face flushed red. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to cry. She was supposed to run. She was supposed to show everyone that Navy personnel were weak, that women didn't belong in combat roles, that his 6 weeks of harassment had broken her. Instead, she stood there like a statue carved from granite, looking at him like he was a training problem she'd solved years ago. "You think you're tough?" Mason stepped into her personal space. "You think because you wear that uniform you're one of us? You're nothing. You hear me? You're a desk sailor playing soldier on a Marine base." "Private First Class Williams." One of Mason's followers laughed loudly. "Tell her, Mason, you know what I think." Mason continued, his voice rising for the audience. "I think you're here because you couldn't cut it anywhere else. I think you're a quota fill. I think... Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper, that you should step back now. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mason blinked. There was something in her tone, something that didn't match her size or her quiet demeanor. Something that made the hair on his arms stand up. But 200 people were watching. He couldn't back down now. Or what? He leaned closer. What are you going to do about it? Elena held his gaze for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then she stepped around him, collected her tray, and walked toward the trash cans without another word. Mason stood frozen, his fists clenched, watching her go. He'd won. He'd dominated. He'd shown everyone who was in charge. So why did it feel like he'd just survived something short-sighted? Elena dumped her ruined meal and returned her tray to the stack. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. But inside, every instinct she'd developed over 7 years of classified operations was screaming at her to respond. She could have ended Mason in 3 seconds, could have applied any of the techniques drilled into her during close-quarters combat training with SEAL Team 6. Could have put him on the ground before he even understood what was happening. But that wasn't who she was anymore. That wasn't who she'd promised to become. She pushed through the mess hall doors and walked into the California sunshine. The September heat hit her like a wall, dry and dusty, with the distant smell of wildfire smoke. She kept walking until she reached a concrete bench behind the admin building, sat down, and finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands started to shake. Not from fear, from control. From the effort required to hold back everything she'd learned to do in places that didn't officially exist. She pulled up her right sleeve and looked at the crescent-shaped scar on her wrist. 3 years old. Mosul. A breaching charge that detonated too close while she and 4 SEAL operators were extracting an ISIS commander from a fortified safe house. She touched the scar without thinking, a nervous habit she'd developed after the surgery that saved her hand. You okay? Elena looked up. Staff Sergeant Torres stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, studying her with careful eyes. I'm fine. No, you're not. He walked closer but didn't sit. I watched you in there. You moved like someone who's done real work. I don't know what you mean. Torres smiled slightly. I spent 18 months attached to JSOC units in Raqqa. I know what operators look like. I know how they carry themselves. He paused. What unit? Elena said nothing. Okay, fair enough. Torres glanced back toward the mess hall. Mason's been running his mouth about you for weeks. Says you're a quota fill. Says you don't belong here. Says he's going to make you request transfer. I've heard. And you're not going to do anything about it. Elena looked at him directly for the first time. What would you suggest I do? Staff Sergeant, I don't know. But whatever you are, whatever you were, he just made a serious mistake. Maybe. Or maybe I'm exactly what my personnel file says. A training liaison doing administrative work. Torres laughed softly. Right. And I'm the Easter Bunny. He started walking away, then stopped. Just so you know, not everyone here agrees with Mason. Most of us just want to do our jobs and go home. I appreciate that. And for what it's worth, whatever's coming for him, I think he's earned it. Torres walked away, leaving Elena alone with the afternoon sun and the distant sound of helicopters running training exercises over the coastal mountains. 6 weeks earlier, Elena Vance had arrived at Camp Pendleton with a sanitized service record and a cover story about training liaison duties. The real story was buried in classified files that required congressional oversight to access. Chief Petty Officer Elena Marie Vance, age 30, born in Flagstaff, Arizona, to Master Sergeant Daniel Vance, U.S. Army Special Forces retired, and Margaret Chen Vance, who'd left when Elena was 8 because she couldn't handle her husband's nightmares and his long silences and his drinking. Daniel Vance had done 3 tours with 5th Special Forces Group in places that still hadn't been declassified. He'd come home carrying weight that never fully lifted. Worked as a hunting guide in the Arizona mountains. Spent his weekends teaching his daughter things most fathers didn't. How to shoot, how to track, how to navigate by stars, how to think tactically when everything went wrong. "The world isn't fair," he'd told her when she was 12, cleaning a rifle on their back porch while the sun set over the desert. "Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's going to hand you anything. You have to earn everything yourself, and you have to be ready for the moment when everyone else gives up." "Why are you telling me this, Dad?" "Because you're a girl, and because the world is going to underestimate you every single day of your life." He looked at her with eyes that had seen things he'd never talk about. Make that their mistake, not yours. By 16, Elena could field strip an M4 in complete darkness, could run 15 miles with a weighted pack, could shoot better than most grown men in Flagstaff. She enlisted in the Navy at 18. Not Army, she didn't want to follow directly in her father's footsteps. She chose her own path. Chose cryptologic technician for the clearances and the challenge. Spent 3 years doing signals intelligence work on destroyers and at shore stations. That was when they found her. The recruiter never gave a full name. Just showed up one day after a training exercise where Elena had identified a pattern in communications intercepts that 3 senior analysts had missed. "How would you like to do work that actually matters?" he asked. "Work that saves lives but never makes the news. What kind of work? The kind where you'd be attached to naval special warfare elements. The kind where you'd operate in places that don't officially exist." Elena thought about her father's words, about being underestimated, about making that everyone else's mistake. Where do I sign? The next 7 years erased any illusions about what intelligence work meant at the operational level. She wasn't analyzing signals from a safe room anymore. She was on the ground with SEAL elements and Army Special Mission Units providing real-time intelligence support in denied areas where one mistake meant capture or death. She learned to breach doors because operators needed extra hands. Learned combat casualty care because medics couldn't be everywhere. Learned to move, shoot, and communicate like someone whose life depended on it. Because it did. Her first kill was in Afghanistan, 2019. A Taliban fighter came through a doorway during a compound clearance. The SEAL in front of her went down with a leg wound. Elena put 3 rounds center mass before the fighter could fire again. She didn't sleep for 2 days afterward. Not because of guilt, the fighter would have killed them all, but because she'd discovered something about herself she hadn't known before. She was capable of violence, real violence, the kind that ended lives in seconds. After that, the work got harder. Yemen, Syria, Somalia. Places where American Special Operations Forces conducted missions that would never appear in any official record. She developed a reputation among the SEAL teams she worked with. Quiet, professional, lethal when necessary. The operators called her Ghost because she could move through hostile territory without being seen, could extract intelligence from sources who'd never talked to anyone else, could disappear when the mission was done like she'd never been there at all. Then came Mosul. March 2022. Elena and a 6-man SEAL element inserted into eastern Mosul to extract an ISIS commander with intelligence on an imminent attack against American forces in Baghdad. The mission went sideways within the first hour. Local militia forces tipped off by someone inside the Iraqi government surrounded the compound before the team could exfiltrate, cut off all extraction routes, disabled their communications equipment with a targeted EMP. 6 Americans trapped in a crumbling 3-story building, limited ammunition, no air support, no way to call for help. For 4 days, they held that building against waves of fighters who wanted to capture them alive to parade American special operators on video before executing them for the world to see. Elena took shrapnel on day 2. A breaching charge detonated too close while she was trying to create an escape route through an interior wall. The explosion threw her backward, tore through her right wrist, nearly severed the tendons that controlled her trigger finger. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Cole, the team leader, dragged her to cover and applied a tourniquet while bullets punched through the walls around them. "How bad?" Elena asked through gritted teeth. "Bad enough. You're done shooting." "The hell I am." She took the morphine he offered, waited for it to kick in, then picked up her rifle left-handed. "I'm not dying in this building, Ryan. None of us are." Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Okay, Ghost. Let's get our people home." Day 3, Day 4. Running out of ammunition. Running out of water. Running out of hope. On the 5th morning, a flight of Army Apache helicopters appeared over the horizon. Someone had finally noticed they were missing. Someone had finally come looking. The extraction was violent and costly. 2 SEALs wounded badly enough to end their careers. Elena lost 60% of the function in her right hand, even after 3 surgeries. But all 6 Americans made it out alive. The ISIS commander made it out alive. The intelligence he provided stopped an attack that would have killed over 300 American personnel in Baghdad. Elena received a classified citation she could never talk about. A medal that would never appear in her official record. A handshake from an admiral who called her the bravest intelligence specialist he'd ever known, and nightmares that woke her at 300 every night for the next 6 months. Ryan Cole died 8 months later. IED on a convoy route outside Raqqa. Wrong place, wrong time. The kind of random death that combat produces with cruel efficiency. Elena got the notification through unofficial channels because her work was too classified for standard casualty reporting. She was in a hotel room in Dubai, debriefing after an operation in Yemen, when her handler knocked on the door. "Cole's gone," he said. "Thought you should know." She didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat down on the bed and stared at the wall for 6 hours while her handler waited in the lobby, giving her space to process. Cole had been the best team leader she'd ever worked with. The one who'd seen her as an equal from day one, who'd never questioned her presence on operations, who'd trusted her completely when their lives depended on it. He'd told her once during a quiet moment in that Mosul compound that the hardest part of their work wasn't the danger. It was coming back afterward and trying to be normal. Trying to pretend you hadn't done things and seen things that would give ordinary people nightmares for years. "Find a line you won't cross," he'd said. "Some boundary that defines who you are beyond the operational requirements. Hold that line no matter what pressure gets applied." "What's your line?" Elena asked. "My daughter. She's 4. Every time I come home, she runs to the door screaming, 'Daddy,' like I'm the greatest thing in the world." His voice softened. "I hold that line by promising myself I'll always be the person she thinks I am." Elena thought about that conversation for a long time after Cole died. Thought about what her line was, what boundary she could hold to keep herself human. She requested rotation out of the JSOC detachment 2 weeks later. Told her handler she was done operating in places that didn't officially exist. They processed her transfer with a cover story about training liaison duties and sent her to Camp Pendleton with a sanitized service record that said nothing about the previous 7 years. The deal she made with herself was simple. Keep her head down. Do administrative work nobody cared about. Try to be something other than a weapon until her 20 years were up, and she could disappear into civilian life. Then Derek Mason decided she needed to learn her place. Mason's harassment had started small. Comments in passageways just loud enough for her to hear. Shoulder checks in the corridors, blocking her path at the post exchange, Small violations designed to establish dominance without crossing lines that would trigger official complaints. Elena ignored all of it, not because she was afraid, because responding would attract attention, would make people curious about the quiet Navy petty officer who'd put a Marine on the ground, would make someone pull her actual file and start asking questions she couldn't answer. But her silence only made Mason escalate. He'd grown up in rural Texas, the middle son of a man who measured worth in physical dominance. His older brother had made it through Marine Raider selection and never let Mason forget it. His younger brother was a star quarterback being recruited by Division I schools. Mason had always been the forgotten one. Never quite good enough. Never quite special enough. Never quite anything enough. The Marines were supposed to change that. Paris Island was supposed to remake him into something worthy of respect. Combat was supposed to give him the validation he craved. But his two deployments, Okinawa and Kuwait, had been operationally quiet. Training exercises and convoy security. Nothing that tested him the way he'd imagined. Nothing that gave him stories to tell. So he'd built his identity around other things. The gym. Volume, intimidation, surrounding himself with junior Marines who mistook his aggression for leadership. And when Elena Vance arrived, quiet, self-contained, utterly unimpressed by his existence, something in him recognized a threat. She never acknowledged him, never looked at him with fear or respect, or anything at all. She just moved past like he was furniture, like he didn't matter. Like everything he'd built himself into was invisible. That was what he couldn't tolerate. If he couldn't make her afraid, he'd make her an example. The mess hall incident wasn't spontaneous. Mason had planned it for 3 days. He'd waited until the room was packed, until maximum witnesses were present, until he could publicly humiliate her in front of everyone who mattered. When his palm connected with her shoulder, when her tray crashed to the floor, when she stumbled forward into the table's edge that was supposed to be the beginning of her destruction. Instead, she'd looked at him like he was nothing. Like he was a child throwing a tantrum. Like everything he'd done was exactly what she'd expected. And then she'd walked away. Mason stood in the mess hall for 5 minutes after she left, accepting congratulations from his followers, pretending he'd won something. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a terrible mistake. "Bro, that was legendary." Private First Class Williams slapped his shoulder. "Did you see her face?" "Yeah," Mason said distantly. "I saw it. She's totally gonna request transfer now. You showed everyone—" "Shut up, Williams." Williams blinked. "What?" "I said, shut up." Mason grabbed his tray and walked to the food line, suddenly not hungry anymore. Something was wrong. Something about the way she'd looked at him. Something about the way Torres had warned him off. Something about the way she'd said, "Step back now," in a voice that didn't match anything else about her. 3 tables away, Sergeant Maria Santos had watched the entire confrontation. She was a combat photographer attached to the base public affairs office, and she had a professional eye for reading situations. "That was weird," she said to her companion, a young corporal named Reyes. "What was weird, Mason being Mason?" "No, the sailor." Santos stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Did you see how she moved when he grabbed her?" She shifted her weight perfectly, kept her balance. Her hands came up into a guard position for half a second before she controlled it. So that's trained response, that's muscle memory, that's someone who's done close quarters work." Reyes shrugged. "She's Navy. They do some combatives training, right?" "Not like that." Santos shook her head. "I spent 6 months embedded with special forces in Afghanistan. I know what operators look like. I know how they carry themselves." "You think she's special ops?" Come on, she's a training liaison. Her file says whatever someone wanted it to say. Santos watched the mess hall doors Elena had walked through. I think Mason just poked something he really shouldn't have. That night, Elena sat on her rack in the barracks and stared at the ceiling. Her hands had stopped shaking hours ago. Her breathing was normal. Her heart rate had returned to baseline. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept replaying the mess hall incident, kept analyzing what she could have done differently, kept calculating alternative responses and their likely outcomes. Option 1. Physical confrontation. She could have put Mason on the ground in seconds, could have applied a joint lock that would have dislocated his shoulder before he understood what was happening, could have made him scream in front of everyone who'd laughed at his harassment. Outcome questions. Investigation. Her file would be pulled. Her cover would collapse. Everything she'd tried to build since Mosul would be destroyed. Option 2, verbal escalation. She could have matched his aggression, could have challenged him publicly, could have forced him to back down or escalate to violence. Outcome. Same as option 1, just slower. Option 3, what she'd actually done. Walk away. Show nothing. Give him no satisfaction and no ammunition. Outcome. The harassment would continue, probably escalate, but her cover would hold. Elena closed her eyes and thought about Ryan Cole. Find a line you won't cross, he'd said. Hold it no matter what. Her line was simple. No more violence. No more operating in denied areas. No more being a weapon. She'd held that line today. Barely. But Mason wasn't going to stop. She could see it in his eyes and his posture, in the way his face had flushed when she'd refused to react. He needed her to break. Needed her to give him the response that would validate everything he believed about himself. And sooner or later he would push hard enough that she'd have to make a choice. Be who she was, or be who she was trying to become. The next morning, Elena was in the base gym at Oro 500 when Mason walked in. She didn't acknowledge him. Just continued her pull-ups, 20 dead hang reps, smooth and controlled, barely breathing hard. Mason watched from the weight area. She could feel his eyes on her, could sense his frustration building like pressure in a sealed container. He approached while she was hydrating between sets. You know what your problem is? Elena took a long drink of water. Good morning, Corporal. Your problem is you don't know your place. Navy support personnel are supposed to stay in the background. Stay quiet. Stay out of the way. I'll keep that in mind. You think you're tough because you didn't cry yesterday. Mason stepped closer. You think that makes you special? Elena looked at him for the first time. Really looked. She saw a young man trying desperately to prove something. Saw the insecurity underneath the aggression. Saw the fear of insignificance that drove every decision he made. A year ago, she might have felt sympathy, might have tried to understand, might have looked for some way to diffuse his pain. But she'd spent 7 years learning that some people chose to be predators. Some people chose to target the vulnerable. Some people only understood consequences. I'm going to finish my workout now, she said quietly. I suggest you go finish yours. Or what? The question hung in the air between them. Elena held his gaze for 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then she smiled slightly, just enough to suggest that "or what" had answers he really didn't want to learn. Mason's confidence flickered, just for a moment, just enough for her to see. Then he turned and walked away, muttering something about Navy trash. Elena went back to her pull-ups, but she'd seen the crack in his armor. She knew what was coming. Men like Mason didn't back down from challenges. They escalated until someone made them stop. The question wasn't whether there would be a confrontation. The question was what she would do when it came. 2 hours later, a company formation was announced for the following Thursday. Mandatory attendance. No exceptions. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the company commander, posted the notice without explanation. Mitchell was a prior enlisted Mustang who'd done time in military intelligence before commissioning. She had a reputation for fairness, for competence, and for absolutely destroying Marines who violated standards on her watch. Something was happening. Something connected to the mess hall incident. Elena felt the familiar tension of operational awareness settling into her body. The heightened state that came before missions. The clarity that preceded action. Whatever was coming, it would force a decision she'd hoped to avoid. Hold the line. Or become what she used to be. The weight of 7 years pressed down on her shoulders. The faces of everyone she'd lost. The things she'd done that would never appear in any record. The person she'd been before she'd decided to be someone else. She walked to the admin building and requested a meeting with Captain Mitchell. If something was coming, she wanted to know what it was. And if Mason was planning to escalate again, she needed to decide how far she was willing to go to stop him. Captain Sarah Mitchell looked up from her desk when Elena knocked on the open door. "Petty Officer Vance, come in. Close the door behind you." Elena stepped inside and stood at attention. Mitchell studied her for a long moment, the kind of assessment that came from years of intelligence work, reading people the way others read books. "At ease. Sit down." Elena sat. Waited. Mitchell leaned back in her chair. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "What happened in the mess hall yesterday?" "Corporal Mason made physical contact and verbal comments. I chose not to escalate." "That's the official version." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "I'm asking for the real version." Elena kept her face neutral. "That is the real version, ma'am." "Petty Officer Vance, I've been in military intelligence for 14 years. I know when someone's giving me a cover story." Mitchell pulled a folder from her desk drawer. "Your personnel file is interesting. Training liaison duties, administrative coordination. Very boring. Very clean." "Yes, ma'am." "Too clean." Mitchell opened the folder. "I made some calls this morning. Talked to a few people I know at JSOC headquarters. Asked about a Navy petty officer named Elena Vance, who might have done some work with special operations elements." Elena's heart rate increased by exactly 3 beats per minute. She controlled her breathing. Showed nothing. "You know what they told me?" "No, ma'am." "They told me they'd never heard of you." Mitchell paused. "Then they asked why I wanted to know. Then they told me to forget I'd ever asked the question." The room went very quiet. "That's a very specific kind of denial, Petty Officer Vance. The kind that tells me everything I need to know without telling me anything at all." Elena said nothing. Mitchell closed the folder. "I don't know what you did before you came here. I don't need to know. What I need to know is whether Corporal Mason is about to create a problem I can't control." "Ma'am, he's planning something. I can see it. His little group has been whispering all morning, looking at you like you're a target." Mitchell leaned forward. "I'm giving you an opportunity to tell me how to handle this before it explodes." Elena considered her options. The captain was offering help, offering protection. All Elena had to do was accept it, but accepting meant explaining. Explaining meant exposure. Exposure meant the end of everything she'd tried to build. "I appreciate your concern, ma'am, but I can handle Corporal Mason." "Can you, or will you?" The question hit harder than Elena expected. "There's a difference," Mitchell continued. "I've seen your type before. People who've done hard things in hard places. People who come back and try to be normal." She paused. "The question isn't whether you're capable of handling Mason. The question is whether you'll let yourself." Elena felt something crack inside her chest, a wall she'd built very carefully over the past 8 months. "I made a promise," she said quietly. "To someone who died, I promised I'd try to be something other than what I was." Mitchell nodded slowly. "And Mason is testing that promise." "Yes, ma'am." "What happens if he pushes too hard?" Elena looked at the captain directly. "I don't know. That's what scares me." The honesty surprised them both. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to her window. "Thursday's formation. I'm announcing a leadership assessment exercise. 4 days in the field. Land navigation, tactical problems, combat casualty care, leadership evaluation under stress." "Ma'am, I'm going to ask Mason to volunteer, publicly, in front of the entire company. He won't be able to refuse without looking like a coward." Elena understood immediately. "You're setting him up." "I'm giving him an opportunity to prove he's the warrior he claims to be." Mitchell turned back. "I'm also going to request your participation as both evaluator and participant. My personnel file doesn't justify that request. Your personnel file is fiction. We both know it." Mitchell sat back down. "This assessment will put you and Mason in the same environment for 4 days. It will test him in ways he's never been tested. And it will give you the opportunity to demonstrate professionally and appropriately exactly what kind of training liaison you really are." Elena processed the implications. The captain was offering her a controlled environment, a legitimate framework for confrontation, a way to handle Mason without destroying her cover or breaking her promise. And if he still doesn't learn, then we'll have documentation, evaluation results, professional assessments from multiple NCOs. Mitchell smiled grimly. Sometimes the best way to destroy someone is to let them destroy themselves. Elena nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. 4 days in the field with someone who hates you is going to be harder than anything Mason can imagine." Mitchell paused. "But probably not harder than what you've already survived." Elena stood and moved toward the door, then stopped. "Ma'am, how did you know to make those calls about my background?" Mitchell's expression didn't change. "Staff Sergeant Torres came to see me last night, said he'd worked with JSOC elements in Syria. Said there was something about you that reminded him of the operators he'd served with." She paused. "He also said Mason was about to make the worst mistake of his life, and someone needed to stop it before people got hurt." Elena filed that information away. Torres had stuck his neck out for her, had risked his own position to protect someone he barely knew. That kind of loyalty meant something. Even after everything she'd seen, it still meant something. "I'll see you Thursday, ma'am. Petty Officer Vance." "One more thing." Elena turned. "Whatever promise you made to whoever died, I hope you can keep it. But if you can't," Mitchell's voice softened, "don't hate yourself for being who you are. Some of us were built for hard work. Pretending otherwise doesn't change that." Elena walked out without answering. But the captain's words followed her all the way back to the barracks. Some of us were built for hard work. She'd spent 8 months trying to be something else, trying to bury Mosul and Yemen and Syria deep enough that they wouldn't matter anymore. But Mason kept digging them back up, and Thursday was coming fast. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Elena maintained her routine PT at FA 500 administrative duties during the day, solitary meals in the mess hall. She ignored Mason's continued harassment, the whispered comments, the shoulder checks in corridors. But she watched, catalogued, prepared. Mason's crew, Williams Cooper and a lance corporal named Brooks, had been meeting in the barracks common area every night, planning something. She could see it in their body language, the way they went quiet when she walked past, the way Mason's confidence had returned and intensified. He thought Thursday would be his victory, his chance to prove publicly that she didn't belong. He had no idea what was coming. Wednesday night, Elena sat on her rack and performed her pre-mission ritual, checked her gear, reviewed the terrain maps she'd memorized, ran through contingencies. Her body remembered this, the heightened awareness, the clarity before action. She hadn't felt it in 8 months, hadn't wanted to feel it. But there it was, the ghost waking up inside her. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Keep your head on a swivel tomorrow. M has something planned beyond the exercise. T. Torres. Warning her. Elena deleted the message and lay back on her rack. Whatever Mason was planning, she'd handle it. She'd survived Mosul, survived Yemen, survived 96 hours in a building surrounded by people who wanted to capture her alive. A 25-year-old corporal with an ego problem wasn't going to break her, but she might have to break him. The thought should have bothered her, should have felt like a violation of the promise she'd made. Instead, it felt like coming home. Thursday morning arrived, cold and overcast. The company assembled at 0600 140 Marines in formation on the parade deck. Elena stood in the back rank wearing her Navy working uniform, looking exactly like the training liaison her personnel feel claimed her to be. Captain Mitchell addressed the formation with crisp efficiency, explained the leadership assessment, outlined the 4-day field exercise, described the evaluations that would become part of permanent service records. Then she called for volunteers. Mason stepped forward immediately, exactly as Mitchell had predicted. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared. He looked like a man preparing for war. 7 other Marines volunteered, all junior NCOs and senior lance corporals looking to prove themselves. Then Mitchell turned to Elena. Petty Officer First Class Vance, your personnel file indicates instructor-level qualifications in small unit tactics from previous joint training assignments. I'm formally requesting your participation as both evaluator and participant. The formation went dead silent. Mason's face cycled through confusion, anger, and something that looked almost like fear. Elena stepped forward. Yes, ma'am. Outstanding. All participants report to the staging area at 0800. Full combat load. Be prepared for 4 days in the field with minimal support. The formation dismissed. Mason pushed through the crowd toward Elena, but Staff Sergeant Torres intercepted him. Save it for the exercise, Mason. Whatever you've got to prove it out there. Mason glared at Torres, then at Elena. This is gonna be fun, Squid. 4 days to show everyone what you really are. Elena held his gaze. Yes, it will be. Something in her tone made Mason step back, just half a step, just enough to notice. Then he turned and stalked away, gathering his crew around him. Torres moved closer to Elena. You got my message? I got it. He's planning something for the first night, something that won't look like an accident but can't be proven. I know. You know, Torres studied her face. How do you know? Because it's what I would do. Elena adjusted her gear. Thank you for the warning, Staff Sergeant, but I've been handling people like Mason since before he was born. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Good luck out there, Vance. Whatever you used to be, I hope you remember how to be it. Elena walked toward the staging area without answering. She remembered. That was the problem. She remembered everything. The first evolution was a 12-mile tactical movement. Full combat load, varied terrain, simulated casualty scenarios requiring proper carries and treatment. Mason led out aggressively, pushing a brutal pace designed to break people early. He wanted to establish dominance, wanted to prove that a Navy training liaison couldn't keep up with Marine infantry. Elena stayed in the middle of the pack, moved with the efficient economy that came from carrying weight across hostile terrain where speed meant survival. Her breathing stayed controlled. Her form stayed perfect. By mile 8, 3 Marines had dropped out from exhaustion or injury. Mason was still pushing, but his stride had shortened. His shoulders were hunching. His breathing was ragged. Elena hadn't changed pace once. Williams fell back to run beside her. "How are you doing that? Doing what? Moving like that? You're not even sweating." Elena glanced at him. Williams was 22, fresh-faced, following Mason because he didn't know any better. There might still be hope for him. "Pacing," she said. "Your corporal is burning out because he started too fast. Tactical movement isn't a sprint. It's about conservation. Mason says you're a desk sailor, says you've never seen real action. Mason says a lot of things. Have you seen action?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I've seen enough." Something in her voice made Williams fall back to his original position. He didn't ask any more questions. Mile 10. Mile 11. The terrain shifted from open ground to dense pine forest. The pace slowed as participants navigated fallen logs and steep ravines. Mason was struggling now. His aggressive start had cost him. His legs were cramping. His face was pale beneath the exertion flush. But his pride wouldn't let him slow down. Wouldn't let him admit weakness in front of the woman he'd been trying to break for 6 weeks. Elena saw the fall coming before it happened. Mason's foot caught a root. His exhausted legs couldn't compensate. He went down hard, his knee slamming into a rock with a sound that made everyone wince. For a moment, nobody moved. Elena could have walked past. Could have let him suffer the consequences of his own arrogance. Could have proven everything she'd been trying to prove without lifting a finger. Instead, she moved to his side. "Don't move. Let me check your knee." Mason tried to push her away. "Get off me. I don't need help from a squid. Your knee is already swelling. If you try to walk on it without assessment, you could cause permanent damage." Elena's voice was calm, professional. "I have combat casualty care certification. Let me help you." "I said get off." "Corporal Mason." Her tone shifted. Just slightly, just enough. "I'm not asking." Mason froze. There was something in her voice command authority that didn't match her rank or her cover story. "Fine," he muttered. "Make it fast." Elena checked his knee with practiced efficiency. No fracture, no ligament tear, just severe bruising and inflammation. "You can walk, but you need to pace yourself for the rest of the movement. Ice and elevation tonight, or you won't be able to continue tomorrow." She stood and extended her hand to help him up. Mason stared at her hand like it was a weapon. "Why are you helping me?" "Because that's what we do. We take care of each other, even when we don't like each other." Mason didn't take her hand. He pushed himself up on his own wincing as weight hit his injured knee. "This doesn't change anything." "I know. I still think you don't belong here." "I know that too." Elena turned and continued the movement, leaving Mason to limp along behind her. But something had shifted. She'd seen it in his eyes. A crack in the certainty. A question where there had only been contempt before. The second evolution was a tactical problem-solving exercise, a notional building clearance with limited intelligence. Mason immediately tried to take charge, his injured knee forgotten in his desperation to reassert dominance. He started issuing orders based on Hollywood scenarios rather than doctrine. "We'll stack on the door. Flashbang through the window. Everyone moves at once." Staff Sergeant Martinez, acting as senior evaluator, watched without comment. Elena observed for 2 minutes. Then she spoke. "That approach will get half your team killed." Mason spun on her. "Excuse me. Stacking the entire team on one entry point creates a fatal funnel. Flashbangs through windows alert everyone inside before you breach. Moving everyone at once means no one's providing cover. And you know better. I know doctrine." Elena stepped forward. "May I demonstrate?" Martinez nodded. "Go ahead, Petty Officer Vance." Elena knelt and sketched a plan in the dirt with a stick. Proper room clearing sequences, covering fire positions, phased movement. She referenced tactics straight from Marine Corps urban operations manuals. Explained angles of attack. Laid out the approach with precision that came from planning real operations where mistakes meant body bags. 2-man teams. Primary breach here, secondary here. First team clears left, second team clears right. Covering positions here and here to catch anyone who rabbits. Martinez studied the plan. Execute it. The scenario went flawlessly. 0 simulated casualties. Every objective achieved. When it was over, Mason stood apart from the group, his face unreadable. Elena walked past him toward the water station. "How do you know that?" His voice was quiet. Different than before. "Know what? Building clearance, room clearing, that's not administrative training." Elena filled her canteen. "I've had good teachers." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's not." She walked away, leaving him with questions he didn't know how to ask. Night fell hard and cold. The participants set up a patrol base and established security rotations. Elena drew the 0200-0400 watch, the dead hours when exhaustion was heaviest and alertness was lowest. She knew Mason would make his move during her watch. It's what she would have done. At 0230, she heard them coming. 3 sets of footsteps trying to be quiet, but failing. Mason, Williams, and Cooper moving through the trees toward her position. Elena didn't move, didn't react. Just waited. They emerged from the darkness 10 meters away. "Thought we'd find you sleeping," Mason said. His knee was wrapped, but he was moving better. Adrenaline overriding pain. "You thought wrong. This isn't official. This is just us having a conversation." "About what?" Mason stepped closer. Williams and Cooper flanked him, trying to look intimidating. "About you leaving, tomorrow morning, telling Captain Mitchell you can't continue, health reasons, personal emergency, whatever excuse you want. And if I don't, then accidents happen in the field, equipment fails, people get lost, nobody's fault." Mason's voice hardened. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Take it." Elena stood slowly. Her movements were deliberate, controlled. The 3 men tensed. "Let me tell you something about accidents, Corporal Mason." She stepped toward him. He held his ground, but barely. "In my experience, they usually happen to the people who plan them, the people who think they're in control, the people who believe they understand the situation." She was very close now, close enough to see the sweat on his forehead despite the cold. "You don't understand the situation. You don't understand who I am, and you don't understand what will happen if you try to hurt me." "Is that a threat?" "No." Elena smiled. "It's a professional assessment." She turned her back on them deliberately, insultingly, and returned to her watch position. "This isn't over," Mason called. "I know," she said without turning around. "It's just beginning." She heard them retreat into the darkness, heard Mason's frustrated cursing, heard Williams ask if they should try again. "No," Mason said. "She was waiting for us. She knew." "How? I don't know, but I'm going to find out who she really is. And when I do, I'm going to destroy her." Elena smiled in the darkness. Let him try. Let him dig. Let him discover the truth. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way. The third day broke, with fog rolling through the training area like smoke from a distant fire. Elena hadn't slept more than 90 minutes. Neither had Mason. She could see it in his bloodshot eyes, the way his hands shook slightly when he gripped his rifle. But neither of them would show weakness. Not now. Staff Sergeant Martinez gathered the remaining participants at SO-600. 7 left from the original 10. 2 had dropped from injuries. 1 had quit during the night, claiming family emergency. Today's evolution is combat casualty care under stress, Martinez announced. Multiple simulated casualties, limited supplies, active hostile fire simulation, blank ammunition and pyrotechnics will be used. Elena felt her body respond to those words. Muscle memory activating. Neural pathways that hadn't fired in 8 months suddenly alive and humming. This was what she knew. This was what she'd done in places that didn't have names on any official map. Martinez continued. You'll be evaluated on triage decisions, treatment accuracy, and leadership under pressure. This evolution has a 60% failure rate among experienced Marines. Questions? No one spoke. Good. Move to the staging area. Exercise begins in 30 minutes. Elena checked her medical kit automatically. Tourniquets in the right position. Chest seals accessible. Israeli bandages staged for quick application. Her hands moved without conscious thought, performing rituals drilled into her across 100 real-world scenarios. Williams watched her preparations. You've done this before, for real. It wasn't a question. Elena didn't answer. She just finished her checks and moved toward the staging area. The first casualty simulation hit at 0647. Blank rounds cracking through the morning air, pyrotechnics exploding with concussive force, evaluators screaming contradictory orders while participants tried to locate and treat simulated wounded. Most people froze. Training always said they wouldn't. Reality always proved otherwise. Mason froze for nearly 8 seconds. 8 seconds that would have meant death in a real combat zone. Then he started moving, but his decisions were wrong. He went to the closest casualty instead of the most critical. Applied treatment without proper assessment. Forgot to call out threats while focused on the patient. Elena moved differently. Her body shifted into operational mode before her conscious mind caught up. She scanned the area in a single sweep, threats, casualties, cover positions. Triaged by injury, severity, rather than proximity. Called out hostile positions while moving toward the most critical patient. A simulated arterial bleed. Evaluator playing dead, with fake blood pumping from a hidden reservoir in his sleeve. Elena dropped beside him, her hands already reaching for the tourniquet. High and tight on the upper arm. Twist the windlass. Secure it. Check for pulse below the tourniquet. None. Good. Casualty 1 tourniquet applied, arterial bleed controlled, she called out. Moving to casualty 2. Martinez watched with narrowed eyes, making notes on his clipboard. The second casualty was a tension pneumothorax simulation. Participant had been tagged with a chest wound indicator. He was supposed to act increasingly distressed as air built up in his chest cavity. Mason reached him first, started applying a chest seal without checking for tension signs. Stop, Elena commanded. She didn't raise her voice, but something in her tone made everyone freeze. What are you? Check his breathing. Listen to both lung fields. Mason glared at her but complied. His face changed when he heard the difference. Breath sounds absent on the left side. The simulated casualty was gasping, his color indicator changing to show oxygen deprivation. He's got tension pneumo, Mason admitted. The seal won't work. Why not? Because the pressure will keep building. So what do you do? Mason's mind went blank. Elena could see it happening, the overwhelm of stress and exhaustion shutting down his cognitive function. She knelt beside the casualty. Needle decompression. Second intercostal space mid-clavicular line. You release the pressure before sealing the wound. She demonstrated the procedure with a training needle, walking through each step while Mason watched. Then you apply the seal. Burping technique if pressure rebuilds. Constant monitoring for recurrence. Martinez made another note. His expression was unreadable. The exercise continued for 3 more hours. Multiple casualties. Escalating complexity. Simulated hostile fire that kept everyone's heads down while people bled out in front of them. Most participants made critical errors. Wrong tourniquet placement, incorrect airway management, failure to prioritize, panic decisions that would have killed patients in a real scenario. Elena made 0 errors. Her treatment was textbook perfect. Her commands were clear and authoritative. Her movement under simulated fire was fluid and controlled. By the time Martinez called the exercise complete, she had personally treated 4 casualties and directed successful treatment of 3 others. Mason had failed 2 of his 3 patients. They gathered for debrief at noon. Martinez went through each participant's performance with surgical precision, identifying errors, explaining consequences, assigning scores. When he reached Elena, he paused. Petty Officer Vance. 0 treatment errors. Correct triage sequencing. Effective leadership under fire. Outstanding combat casualty care performance. The other participants stared at her. I have one question, Martinez continued. Where did you learn field medicine at this level? Elena kept her voice neutral. Joint training assignments. Staff Sergeant. Working with Special Operations medical personnel. Special Operations medical personnel, Martinez repeated. Must have been extensive training. It was comprehensive. Martinez held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded and moved on to the next participant. But the question hung in the air. Everyone had seen her work. Everyone knew that what they'd witnessed wasn't administrative training. It was operational experience written in muscle memory and automatic responses that only came from doing the real thing. Mason sat apart from the group during the lunch break. His face was pale. His hands were shaking again, but not from cold or exhaustion this time. Elena watched him from across the clearing. She could see what was happening inside him, the collision between who he thought he was and who he'd just proven himself to be. Part of her wanted to leave him alone, let him suffer the natural consequences of his arrogance. But another part remembered what Ryan Cole had said about finding a line to hold, about being the person you wanted to be, not just the person circumstances demanded. She walked over and sat down next to him. Get away from me. Your tourniquet placement was wrong because you were taught wrong, not because you're incapable. Mason looked at her. What? The training you received showed placement at the wound site. Current doctrine says high and tight, as close to the torso as possible. It's a common error from outdated instruction. Why are you telling me this? Because you're not stupid, Mason. You're undertrained. There's a difference. His jaw tightened. I don't need your pity. Good, because I'm not offering any. Elena stood up. The next evolution is the 24-hour patrol defense. Your team will need competent treatment capability. Either learn the correct techniques or watch your people fail. She started to walk away. Vance. She stopped. Who the hell are you? Elena turned back. For a moment she considered telling him the truth. Considered describing Mosul and Yemen and the 96 hours she'd spent keeping people alive in a building surrounded by enemies. Instead, she said, "I'm someone who learned the hard way that ego gets people killed. You can either learn that lesson from me, or you can learn it the way I did." "And how did you learn it?" "By watching friends die because someone thought they knew more than they did." She walked away before he could respond, but she felt his eyes on her back the entire time. The 24-hour patrol defense began at 1400. Participants established a defensive position, set security rotations, and prepared to maintain operations through the night and into the following day. Mason's leadership had deteriorated visibly. His commands were uncertain. His decisions were second-guessed by his own team. The confidence that had carried him through 6 weeks of harassment had cracked, and everyone could see it. By hour 6, Williams approached Elena during a brief stand-down. "Can I ask you something? Go ahead." "What Mason said in the mess hall. What he's been doing for the past 6 weeks." Williams looked uncomfortable. "I went along with it. I laughed. I thought... I don't know what I thought." "You thought he was right? That I didn't belong here?" "Yeah." Williams met her eyes. "I was wrong." Elena studied him. 22 years old, still moldable, still capable of becoming something better than what he'd been. "What made you change your mind?" "Watching you today. The way you moved. The way you treated casualties. The way you talked Mason through that pneumo when you could have let him fail." Williams paused. "Nobody does that for someone who's been treating them like garbage. Unless they're, I don't know, better than that person. Or unless they understand that people can change. Can they change? I mean, sometimes, if they want to badly enough." Elena glanced toward Mason, who was struggling to coordinate a security rotation. "The question is whether the desire for change comes from inside or whether it has to be forced from outside. Which one works better? Inside, always inside. External force creates resentment. Internal motivation creates transformation." Williams nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. For what I did. For going along with it. I know." Elena returned her attention to the perimeter. "Now get back to your position before Martinez catches you socializing during a tactical exercise." Williams went, but something had shifted. One more crack in Mason's support structure. One more mind opening to possibility. The night hours crawled past. Exhaustion settled over the patrol base like a physical weight. Marines nodded off at their posts, caught themselves, struggled to stay alert. Elena maintained perfect vigilance. Her body remembered worse nights in worse places. 4 hours without sleep was nothing compared to 96 hours in Mosul. At 0300, Mason's perimeter security collapsed. One of his Marines had fallen asleep at a critical observation post. Evaluators simulating hostile forces infiltrated the position without detection. By the time the alarm was raised, 3 participants had been tagged as casualties. Martinez's voice cut through the chaos. "Security breach. 3 friendly KIA. All participants to the command position. Now." They gathered in exhausted silence. Martinez's face was stone. "This is the kind of failure that gets people killed. Real people. Your friends. Your brothers and sisters." He pointed at the Marine who'd fallen asleep. "You, out. Exercise terminated for you." The Marine walked away with his head down. "The rest of you have 12 hours remaining. I suggest you figure out how to function as a team before more of you join him." Martinez left them alone in the darkness. Mason stood apart from the group, his face shadowed. Elena could see him struggling with exhaustion, with failure, with the growing realization that everything he'd believed about himself was being systematically dismantled. She made a decision. "We need to reorganize the security rotation. she said to the group. Current plan isn't accounting for fatigue levels. We need shorter shifts with mandatory rest periods between. One of the sergeants, a Marine named Rodriguez, who'd been quietly competent throughout the exercise, nodded. Makes sense, but who's going to coordinate? Everyone looked at Mason. He was still the senior lance corporal, still technically in charge. But Mason was staring at the ground, his authority shattered. Elena spoke again. I'll take coordination if no one objects. Corporal Mason can supervise overall security. We work together, or we all fail. Rodriguez looked at Mason. Corporal. Mason lifted his head. His eyes found Elena's in the darkness. She saw something there she hadn't seen before. Not hatred, not contempt, but confusion. Like a man discovering that the map he'd been following led somewhere he never expected. Fine, he said quietly. Vance coordinates. I'll handle perimeter checks. It was the first time he'd deferred to her. The first crack in his armor that he'd allowed anyone to see. Elena nodded once and started reorganizing the rotation. Her commands were calm, clear, professional. Marines who'd been stumbling with exhaustion found new focus under her direction. By dawn, the patrol base was functioning smoothly. Security rotations were tight. Rest periods were enforced. The team was operating like a unit instead of a collection of individuals. Martinez observed from a distance, making notes. The final evolution began at 0800, a complex tactical problem requiring coordination, decision-making, and execution under extreme fatigue. 12 hours without sleep. Muscles screaming. Minds foggy. Mason gathered his team for the briefing. His voice was stronger than it had been the night before, but there was something different in it. Humility, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. Here's the situation. Simulated hostage rescue. 3 buildings. Unknown number of hostiles. 2 hostages confirmed, possible 3rd unconfirmed. We have 30 minutes to plan and execute. He looked at Elena. Vance, you've got experience with this kind of thing. What's your recommendation? The team went silent. Mason was asking for her input. Publicly. Without hostility or resentment. Elena stepped forward and studied the terrain model the evaluators had constructed. Her mind automatically processed angles of approach fields of fire, probable hostile positions. Primary breach team here, she said, pointing. Secondary team is blocking force here. Sniper overwatch position on this elevation. Entry points staggered by 4 seconds to prevent fratricide. She walked through the entire plan, explaining each element, answering questions, incorporating suggestions from other team members. When she finished, Mason nodded. Good plan. Let's execute. The operation went smoothly. Not perfectly, everyone was too exhausted for perfection, but competently. Hostages secured, hostiles neutralized. No friendly casualties. When Martinez called exercise complete, the team collapsed where they stood. 4 days of physical and mental punishment finally catching up with them. Elena sat with her back against a tree, her eyes closed. Her body ached in places she'd forgotten could hurt. Vance. She opened her eyes. Mason stood over her, his face unreadable. Can we talk privately? Elena pushed herself to her feet. Her muscles screamed in protest. Lead the way! They walked 20 meters from the group out of earshot. Mason was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I made some calls last night, during my rest period. Called a buddy at JSOC headquarters, asked about Navy personnel named Vance who might have worked with special operations. Elena's expression didn't change. And he said he'd never heard of you. Then he got real quiet. Then he said I should forget I ever asked the question and hung up. Elena waited. That's the same thing that happens when you ask about people who do classified work. People who've done things that can't be talked about. Mason met her eyes. I've been harassing someone who's probably done more real combat than my entire battalion combined. Haven't I? Elena considered her response carefully. What I've done or haven't done doesn't change what happened in that mess hall. Doesn't change 6 weeks of harassment. I know. Then why are you telling me this? Mason's jaw tightened. Because I need to know. Not details. Not specifics. Just, was any of it real? My assumptions about you? Or was I completely wrong about everything? Elena looked at this young man who'd been her enemy for 6 weeks, saw the crumbling of certainty, saw the fear of discovering that his entire worldview was built on false foundations. She thought about Ryan Cole, about the promise she'd made, about being something other than a weapon. I spent 7 years doing work I can't talk about, she said quietly. Work that took me to places that don't appear on any map. Work that cost me things I can never get back. Mason's face went pale. I came here to get away from that, to try being someone different, someone who doesn't have to calculate threat levels every time she enters a room. Elena paused. You made that very difficult. I'm sorry. The words came out rough, like they'd been dragged from somewhere deep. I know you are. The question is what you're going to do about it. Mason was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Older, somehow. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm a warrior, trying to earn what my brother earned, what my father demanded. He shook his head. Then I watched you work for 4 days. Watched you save simulated lives while I was making mistakes that would have killed real people. Watched you help me when you had every reason to let me fail. He met her eyes. You're the real thing. I'm not. I never was. That's not true. Mason blinked. What? You're not the real thing yet. There's a difference. Elena stepped closer. What I have came from training and experience. Both of those things are available to you, but not if you keep trying to prove you already have them. I don't understand. Stop pretending you know things you don't. Stop attacking people who make you feel inadequate. Start learning from everyone who has something to teach you. Elena paused. Start being the person you want to be instead of performing the person you think others expect. Mason stared at her. The arrogance was gone. The hostility was gone. What remained was a young man standing at a crossroads trying to decide which path to take. How do I do that? One decision at a time, starting with what you do when we get back to base. What do you mean? I mean you have a choice. You can pretend the last 4 days didn't happen. Go back to your crew. Go back to being the person who assaulted me in the mess hall. Elena held his gaze. Or you can let this experience change you. Accept that you were wrong. Find a better way to become what you want to be. What if I don't know what I want to be? Then figure it out. That's what the journey is for. Martinez's whistle cut through the morning air. Debrief time. Elena started walking back toward the group, then stopped. Mason, one more thing. He looked at her. Whatever you decide, I won't be your enemy anymore. But I won't be your victim either. We start fresh, or we don't start at all. She walked away without waiting for his response. But she'd seen something in his eyes. Something that might have been the beginning of real change. The debrief took 2 hours. Martinez went through every evolution, every decision, every success and failure. When he reached his overall assessment, he paused. 2 participants demonstrated exceptional performance throughout this exercise. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez showed consistent tactical competence and leadership under pressure. Rodriguez nodded, accepting the acknowledgement, and Petty Officer First Class Vance demonstrated the highest level of combat skills, medical capability, and leadership I have observed in 15 years of conducting these assessments. The team stared at Elena. I don't know what her background is, Martinez continued. Her personnel file doesn't explain what I witnessed over the past 4 days, but I know operator-level performance when I see it. He looked directly at Elena. Whatever you were before you came here, thank you for showing these Marines what real competence looks like. Elena nodded once, but said nothing. Martinez dismissed the group to prepare for transport back to main base. As Marines scattered to gather gear, Elena felt someone approach from behind. Vance! She turned. A woman in Navy service dress whites stood 20 meters away. Iron gray hair, chest full of ribbons, the quiet intensity of someone who'd spent decades doing work that mattered. Elena recognized her immediately. Commander Elizabeth Whitaker, her former handler at JSOC, the woman who'd processed her transfer to Camp Pendleton, the woman who knew every classified detail of Elena's 7-year career. Commander, Elena said carefully, I wasn't expecting you. Whitaker walked closer. Her eyes swept over Elena with professional assessment. Captain Mitchell called me 3 days ago, told me about the mess hall incident, told me about a corporal named Mason who'd been making trouble. I handled it. I know. Martinez has been sending me reports. Whitaker paused. Impressive work over the past 4 days. You haven't lost anything. I wasn't trying to prove that. I know what you were trying to prove. I know about the promise you made. Whitaker's voice softened slightly. Cole would have understood, but he also would have told you that hiding from who you are isn't the same as becoming someone new. Elena felt the words hit somewhere deep, the place where she'd buried Mosul and Yemen, and everything that came before. Why are you here, Commander? Whitaker smiled. I have a proposition for you, something that might help you keep that promise while still being useful. I'm done with operational work. I'm not offering operational work. Whitaker glanced toward the Marines loading onto transport vehicles. I'm offering a teaching position, combat instructor with the Marine Corps Martial Arts program at Quantico. Pass on what you know to the next generation. Elena went still. No more denied areas. No more classified operations, just training Marines and sailors to survive situations that most people don't walk away from. Whitaker paused. Use what you learned to help others learn it. That seems like a promise worth keeping. Elena looked toward the transport. Mason was standing near the vehicle watching her conversation with Whitaker. His face was uncertain. She thought about Ryan Cole, about the 96 hours in Mosul. About 7 years of doing work that left marks on her soul. She thought about the promise she'd made to try being something other than a weapon. Maybe Whitaker was right. Maybe teaching was a way to honor that promise without abandoning who she was. When would it start? Orders can be processed within a week. You'd report to Quantico by the end of the month. Elena looked at the crescent scar on her wrist, the permanent reminder of everything she'd survived. I need to think about it. Take your time. But Elena, Whitaker's voice was serious. What you did over these 4 days, that's not hiding. That's not pretending. That's showing young warriors what's possible. That's exactly what Cole would have wanted you to do. Whitaker walked away toward a waiting vehicle. Elena stood alone, watching her go, feeling the weight of a decision that would determine who she became next. The transport truck rumbled back toward Camp Pendleton through the California coastal hills. Elena sat in the rear, her back against the metal frame, watching the other participants process what they'd just experienced. Most of them slept. 4 days of deprivation had taken its toll. Bodies slumped against each other, against packs, against anything that offered support. Mason sat directly across from her, his eyes open, watching her without pretense. "You're not sleeping," Elena said. "Neither are you." "I've had practice." Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question she'd been waiting for. "The commander, the one in the dress whites. Who was she?" "Someone I used to work for." "Jay Sock." Elena didn't answer. But her silence was answer enough. Mason leaned his head back and stared at the canvas roof. "I've been such an idiot." "Yes," he laughed bitterly. "You're not going to argue with me. Why would I? You were an idiot. The question is whether you're going to stay one." "What if I don't know how to be anything else?" Elena studied him. Exhausted. Humiliated. Stripped of every illusion he'd constructed about himself. This was the moment that mattered, the moment when a person either rebuilt themselves stronger or collapsed into the rubble of who they used to be. "My father was Special Forces," she said. "Green Beret, 3 tours in places that still haven't been declassified." Mason looked at her with surprise. She hadn't shared anything personal with him before. "He came home broken, drank too much, couldn't sleep, couldn't talk about what he'd seen." Elena paused. "But he taught me something important. He said the world would underestimate me every single day because of what I looked like. A girl. Small. Not threatening. And he told me to make that their mistake, not mine." Elena met Mason's eyes. "You've been making a lot of mistakes, Mason. Underestimating people, assuming you know who they are based on what they look like. That's a fatal error in combat. And it's a fatal error in life. How do I fix it? Start by learning from everyone around you. The person cleaning the barracks might know something you don't. The sailor eating alone might have skills that would take you years to develop." She leaned forward. "Humility isn't weakness. It's the foundation of real strength." Mason absorbed her words. Something shifted in his expression, a door opening that had been locked for years. "The commander offered you something. I saw it in your face. Teaching position. Quantico. Combat instructor. Are you going to take it?" Elena looked out at the passing landscape. "I don't know yet." "You should." She looked back at him. "Why do you say that?" "Because what you did out there, the way you taught me, the way you helped the whole team, that was different from everything else." Mason's voice was rough with emotion. "You could have let me fail. Let me humiliate myself. You had every reason to." "I did. But you didn't. You taught me instead. Even when I didn't deserve it." He paused. "That's what real leaders do. That's what I want to be someday." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. The same wall she'd built to protect herself from connection, from vulnerability, from the pain of caring about people who might die. "I made a promise to someone," she said quietly. "Someone who died. I promised I'd try to be something other than a weapon. Teaching isn't being a weapon. Teaching is passing on what you know so others can survive." "That's what the commander said." "Then maybe she's right." The truck hit a pothole, jarring everyone awake. The moment between them shattered. Marines groaned and shifted. Someone complained about the suspension. But something had changed. Elena felt it. A connection formed in the crucible of the past 4 days. Not friendship exactly, but understanding. The beginning of respect. Maybe that was enough. The transport pulled into Camp Pendleton at 14:30. Participants stumbled off the truck like survivors of a disaster barely able to stand after 4 days of punishment. Captain Mitchell waited at the staging area with her arms crossed and her evaluator's clipboard in hand. "Everyone to the debrief room in 1 hour," she announced. "Clean up, eat something, then report for final assessment." Elena started toward the barracks. Torres fell into step beside her. "Hell of a performance out there, Vance." "I did what was necessary. You did more than that. Martinez called me halfway through day 2, said he'd never seen anything like it. Torres paused. He also said Mason's been different since the night confrontation. Mason's learning. Slowly. What did you say to him during that private conversation this morning? The truth. That he's not the warrior he thinks he is yet, but he could be if he stops pretending. Torres whistled softly. That's either going to break him or remake him. That's his choice, not mine. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Torres asked the question everyone was thinking. The commander, Whitaker. I recognized some of her ribbons. Silver Star, Bronze Stars with V device. That's serious operational history. Elena said nothing. She didn't come all the way to Camp Pendleton just to watch a training exercise. She came for you. Torres stopped walking. What did she offer? A second chance. At what? Elena looked at him. Really looked. Torres had stuck his neck out for her from the beginning, had warned her about Mason's plans, had recognized what she was when everyone else saw a desk sailor. He deserved some version of the truth. At being useful without being destructive, at teaching instead of operating. She paused. At keeping a promise to a dead friend. Torres nodded slowly. Quantico. How did you know? Because that's where they send operators who burn out but still have value. Combat instructor program. Pass on what you learned the hard way, so the next generation doesn't have to learn it the same way. Is that what I am burned out? Torres considered the question carefully. I think you're someone who's been through more than most people could survive. And I think you're trying to figure out who you are when you're not in the middle of that anymore. And teaching would help with that. Teaching is how you honor what you learned. It's how you make meaning out of the suffering. Torres started walking again. At least that's what my therapist told me after Raqqa. Elena smiled slightly. You have a therapist? Everyone who's done real work should have a therapist. The ones who don't end up like Mason, broken in ways they can't see, taking it out on people who don't deserve it. They reached the barracks entrance. Torres stopped and turned to face her. Whatever you decide, Vance, it was an honor watching you work. You're the real thing. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. He walked away before she could respond. Elena stood alone, processing his words. The real thing. That's what Mason had called her too. What Martinez had implied in his assessment. But what did being the real thing mean if she was trying to become something else? The debrief room was packed when Elena arrived. All assessment participants, plus Captain Mitchell, Commander Whitaker, and several senior NCOs, including Martinez and a gunnery sergeant, Elena didn't recognize. She found a seat in the back. Mason sat 3 rows ahead, his posture different than it had been a week ago. Less aggressive, more contained. Mitchell called the room to order. I'll keep this brief. The leadership assessment you just completed was designed to identify potential. Some of you demonstrated significant capability. Others revealed areas requiring substantial development. She glanced at her clipboard. Assessment results will be included in your permanent service records. High performers will be recommended for advanced leadership schools. Low performers will be counseled on improvement plans. Martinez stood and began reading individual assessments. Most were average. A few were below standard. Rodriguez received exceptional marks for consistent tactical competence. When he reached Mason's name, the room went quiet. Corporal Mason, mixed performance, strong physical capability but significant deficiencies in tactical decision-making, leadership under pressure, and medical treatment accuracy. Martinez paused. However, evaluators noted substantial improvement over the 4-day period. Willingness to learn from mistakes. Acceptance of guidance from other participants. Mason kept his eyes forward, but Elena could see his shoulders tense. Final assessment. Below average overall, but with documented growth trajectory. Recommend remedial training and reassessment in 6 months. Mason exhaled slowly. Not good news, but not catastrophic either. A chance to prove he could change. Martinez continued to Elena's name. Petty Officer First Class Vance, exceptional performance across all evaluation criteria, 0 treatment errors in combat casualty care, superior tactical planning and execution, outstanding leadership under extreme conditions. The room shifted. Everyone was listening now. Evaluators note that Vance's performance exceeded baseline expectations by a significant margin. Her capability suggests training and experience well beyond what her personnel file indicates. Martinez looked up from his clipboard. In 15 years of conducting these assessments, I have never seen performance at this level from someone classified as administrative support personnel. The silence in the room was absolute. Recommend immediate transfer to advanced instructor billet where her capabilities can benefit the training pipeline. Martinez sat down. All eyes turned to Elena. Commander Whitaker stood. I'm going to explain something that most of you don't have clearance to know. But given what you've witnessed over the past 4 days, you deserve context. She walked to the front of the room. Petty Officer Vance spent 7 years attached to naval special warfare elements in a support role that required her to operate alongside SEAL teams in denied environments. Her work contributed directly to operations that saved American lives. Murmurs rippled through the room. 8 months ago, she requested transfer to conventional duty for personal reasons that I won't discuss. Her personnel file was sanitized to protect operational security. She was assigned here as a training liaison with the expectation that she would complete her service quietly. Whitaker's gaze swept the room. What happened in your mess hall 6 weeks ago was an assault on someone who has done more for this country than most people will ever know. What happened over the past 4 days was a demonstration of capability that should humble everyone in this room. She turned to Elena. Petty Officer Vance, I'm formally offering you a position as combat instructor with the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program at Quantico. Full instructor billet. The opportunity to train the next generation of warriors. Elena stood slowly. Every eye in the room was on her. Do you accept? The question hung in the air. Elena thought about Ryan Cole, about Mosul, about the promise she'd made to be something other than a weapon. Teaching wasn't being a weapon. Teaching was passing forward what she'd learned. Teaching was honoring the dead by preparing the living. Yes, ma'am, I accept. The room erupted. Marines who'd been hostile a week ago were nodding with respect. Mason's face showed something that might have been relief, or maybe admiration. Whitaker shook her hand formally. Orders will be processed within the week. Report to Quantico by month's end. Yes, ma'am. The debrief concluded shortly after. Participants filed out, many stopping to offer Elena congratulations or questions. She answered briefly, deflecting attention she didn't want. Mason waited until the room was nearly empty. Vance, she turned. He stood at attention, his posture formal, his expression serious. I owe you an apology, a real one, not just words, but accountability. What does that mean? It means I'm going to request mast with Captain Mitchell. I'm going to formally document what I did in the mess hall and what I've been doing for the past 6 weeks. I'm going to take whatever punishment comes. Elena studied him. Why? Because you were right. About everything. About who I was. About what I was pretending to be. His voice cracked slightly. I hurt you. I tried to destroy your career. I did it because I felt small, and you made me feel smaller. And now I understand that my feelings weren't your responsibility. My insecurity wasn't your fault. The person I was attacking was someone who'd sacrificed more than I could imagine." Mason's eyes were wet. He blinked rapidly, fighting to maintain composure. "I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure there's a record. Make sure anyone who looks at my file knows what kind of person I was and what I did about it." Elena felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't expected. "That takes courage. It's the least I can do." She considered her next words carefully. "When I get to Quantico, they're going to ask me to recommend Marines for advanced training, people I've worked with who show potential." Mason's expression didn't change, but she saw hope flicker in his eyes. "In 6 months after you complete your remedial training, send me your package. If you've genuinely changed, if you've become the person you're talking about becoming, I'll consider it. You'd do that after everything. People can change. You told me that yourself." Elena extended her hand. "Prove you meant it." Mason took her hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, respectful. "Thank you. I won't waste it." He walked out, leaving Elena alone in the empty debrief room. She stood there for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. The mess hall assault, the 6 weeks of harassment, the 4-day assessment, the revelation, the transformation. She'd come to Camp Pendleton trying to hide from who she was, trying to bury the operator, the survivor, the weapon. Instead, she'd discovered that who she was could become something new without being destroyed, that the skills she'd developed through pain and loss could serve a different purpose. She thought about Ryan Cole one more time, about the promise made in that Mosul compound. Try to be something other than a weapon. She was keeping that promise, not by hiding, not by pretending, but by channeling what she knew toward building others up instead of tearing enemies down. That felt like enough. The mess hall was quiet when Elena walked in that evening. The same fluorescent lights, the same plastic chairs, the same laminate tables. But everything was different. Marines who'd ignored her before now nodded as she passed. Some stood. A few offered salutes that weren't technically required. She collected her tray and headed for her usual corner table. Torres was already there, along with Rodriguez and 2 other NCOs from the assessment. They'd saved her a seat. "Mind if I join you?" Rodriguez grinned. "We were hoping you would." Elena sat. For the first time in 2 months, she wasn't eating alone. "So," Torres said, "Quantico, combat instructor. That's a serious gig. It's a chance to do something different. Different good or different bad?" Elena thought about the question. "Different meaningful. I spent 7 years doing work that mattered but couldn't be acknowledged. This is work that matters and actually helps people grow." "You'll be good at it," Rodriguez said. "The way you taught during the assessment, that wasn't just knowledge. That was the ability to transfer knowledge. Not everyone has that. My father had it. He taught me everything I know about survival. Not through manuals or classrooms, through patience and repetition and being there when I failed." "Sounds like a good man." "He was. Before the war broke him." Elena paused. "I spent a long time being angry about that. Angry that he gave everything to his country and came home unable to function. Angry that the system chewed him up and spit him out. And now I understand that the system didn't break him. The experiences did. And the only way to prevent that is to prepare people better before they face those experiences." Torres nodded. "That's why teaching matters. You're not just training skills, you're building resilience." "Exactly." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The mess hall filled up around them, Marines coming and going, the usual noise of a military dining facility. Then Williams appeared at the end of the table, looking uncertain. "Petty Officer Vance, can I talk to you for a minute?" Elena gestured to an empty seat. "Sit down." Williams sat, his discomfort obvious. "I wanted to apologize for going along with Mason, for laughing when I should have spoken up, for being part of something that was wrong. I appreciate that. I also wanted to ask," he hesitated, "is it true what the commander said about you working with SEAL teams?" "It's true. I can't imagine that, being in those situations, doing those things." Williams shook his head. "And then coming here and having someone like Mason treat you like I was nothing. Yeah." Elena set down her fork. "Let me tell you something, Williams. What Mason thought of me didn't matter. His opinion didn't change who I was or what I'd done. It only revealed who he was." "What do you mean? When someone attacks you for no reason, when someone tries to tear you down because of what you look like, or what they assume about you that says nothing about your value. It says everything about their insecurity." Williams absorbed this. "So you didn't feel hurt when he did those things?" "I felt frustrated. I felt angry. I felt tired of dealing with someone else's broken ego." Elena paused. "But I never felt less than, because my worth wasn't determined by his opinion. It was determined by my actions, my service, my commitment to doing the right thing." That's really hard to do. It takes practice and support." Elena looked at the men sitting around her. "Find people who see your real value, people who challenge you to grow instead of tearing you down. Those are the relationships worth investing in." Williams nodded slowly. Then he stood. "Thank you for talking to me, for not hating me." "I don't hate anyone, Williams. I'm just trying to build something better." He walked away, and Elena returned to her meal. Torres leaned over. "You just changed that kid's life." "Maybe. Or maybe he'll forget everything by next week." "I don't think so. The way he looked at you, that was transformation. That was someone seeing the world differently for the first time." Elena hoped he was right. Hoped that something good could come from all the ugliness of the past weeks, because that was why she'd accepted the Quantico position. Not for recognition, not for advancement, for moments like this, moments when teaching could change the trajectory of someone's life. That night, Elena packed her few personal belongings. The transfer orders would come tomorrow. By week's end, she'd be at Quantico starting a new chapter. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Package accepted. Formal documentation submitted. Whatever comes next, I earned it. Thank you for believing I could be better. M. Mason. Taking accountability. Following through." Elena typed a response. 6 months. Don't waste them." She set the phone down and looked at the crescent scar on her wrist. The permanent reminder of Mosul, of 96 hours of survival, of the friends who'd made it out, and the one who hadn't. Ryan Cole would have understood this moment, would have appreciated what she was becoming. Not a weapon anymore. Not just a survivor. A teacher. A builder. Someone who used what she'd learned in the darkness to help others find the light. 6 months later, Elena stood in the training bay at Quantico, watching her third class of students file in. 23 Marines fresh from the School of Infantry, carrying themselves with the confidence that came from surviving boot camp and believing they knew something about combat. They didn't know anything yet. That was why they were here. "Take positions," she called out. "Partner up. We start in 5 minutes." The Marines scrambled to comply. Elena watched them move, cataloging strengths and weaknesses automatically. This one had good balance. That one telegraphed his intentions. The tall one in the back moved like an athlete, but probably couldn't take a hit. Master Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Coyle walked up beside her. He was the senior instructor, 3 Fallujah tours, and a lifetime of close-quarters combat experience written into his scarred knuckles and crooked nose. "New batch looks green," he said. "They always look green." True. Coyle studied her with the same assessing gaze she was using on the students. "You've changed since you got here." "How so?" "When you arrived, you moved like you were still in operational mode, checking exits, calculating threat levels, ready to fight at any second. And now you move like someone who's found her purpose, still dangerous, but grounded." Elena considered his words. He was right. The hypervigilance that had followed her from Mosul to Camp Pendleton had finally begun to fade. Not because the skills had diminished, but because she'd found a way to channel them that didn't require constant readiness for violence. "Teaching helps," she said, "focusing on their development instead of my survival." Coyle nodded. "That's what it did for me too. After the third deployment, I couldn't function in normal society. My wife was ready to leave. My kids were scared of me." He paused. "Then they offered me this billet, said I could pass on what I'd learned instead of letting it eat me alive." "Did it work? I'm still married. My kids talk to me. I sleep most nights without medication." Coyle shrugged. "It's not perfect. The nightmares still come. But I've got something to wake up for." Elena understood exactly what he meant. The 5 minutes passed. She walked to the front of the training bay and faced her students. "I'm Petty Officer First Class Vance. For the next 8 weeks, I'll be teaching you how to survive situations that most people don't walk away from." 23 faces stared back at her. Some curious, some skeptical. One kid in the front row couldn't have been more than 19, looked at her like she was someone's lost grandmother who'd wandered into the wrong building. She'd seen that look before. It didn't bother her anymore. "Before we start, I want to make something clear. I'm not here to impress you. I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here to give you skills that will keep you alive when everything goes wrong." She walked down the line, making eye contact with each student. "Some of you are looking at me and thinking you already know what I am. Small, female, Navy. You're calculating how hard this class can really be if someone like me is teaching it." The kid in the front row flushed red. She'd read his thoughts exactly. "That's fine. Underestimate me. It's a mistake people have been making my whole life." She stopped and faced the group. "But here's what you need to understand. Every assumption you make about someone based on appearance is a potential fatal error. The enemy who kills you won't look like what you expected. The ally who saves your life might be the last person you'd trust based on first glance." She let that sink in. "Now, partner up. We're going to start with basic defensive techniques. By the end of today, you'll understand exactly how wrong your assumptions can be." The training began. 3 hours later, the students stumbled out of the bay, exhausted and humbled. Elena had demonstrated technique after technique, moving through them like they were standing still, putting them on their backs before they understood what was happening. The kid from the front row, his name was Peterson, she'd learned, approached her after the session. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Where did you learn to do that, move like that?" Elena considered how much to share. The classified details were still off limits, but there were ways to answer honestly without violating security. "I spent 7 years working in places where those skills meant the difference between life and death. I learned from some of the best operators in the world, and I practiced until my body knew what to do before my mind caught up." Peterson nodded slowly. "I made assumptions about you when I first walked in. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be better." Elena met his eyes. "The goal isn't to make you feel guilty about your biases. The goal is to make you aware of them so they don't get you or your teammates killed. Yes, ma'am. Peterson walked away. Elena watched him go, remembering another young Marine who'd made assumptions, who'd let his insecurities turn him cruel, who'd eventually learned a better way. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number with a Camp Pendleton area code. Assessment complete. Recommended for Marine Raider Selection Pipeline. Couldn't have done it without what you taught me. Starting BRC next month. Mason. Elena read the message twice, then smiled. 6 months ago, Derek Mason had been a bully with an ego problem attacking people who made him feel small. Now he was entering the pipeline that would test him harder than anything he'd ever experienced. She typed a response. Proud of you. Remember humility first. Skills follow. The reply came almost immediately. Learned that from someone who knew what she was talking about. Elena pocketed her phone and walked toward the instructor's office. The sun was setting through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Coyle was waiting for her with 2 cups of coffee. Good first session with the new batch. They'll learn. The skeptical ones always do once they realize their assumptions don't protect them. Peterson, already starting to figure it out. Coyle handed her a coffee. Commander Whitaker called while you were teaching. She's coming to Quantico next week. Wants to observe your advanced tactics class. Elena felt a flicker of something not anxiety exactly, but awareness. Whitaker had been her handler for years. The woman who knew every classified detail of her operational history. Having her observe felt like being evaluated by someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. Any particular reason? She's putting together a new training program, cross-service integration, wants to include some of your methodologies. Coyle paused. She also mentioned they're looking for someone to help design the curriculum. Design curriculum. You'd be involved in shaping how the next generation of special operators are trained, not just at the tactical level, but at the strategic level. Doctrine development, training standards, the whole package. Elena processed the implications. This was bigger than teaching classes. This was influencing how the military approached combat preparation at the highest levels. That's a significant step up. That's why she wants to observe first. Make sure you're ready. Coyle studied her face. Are you? Elena thought about her father teaching her to shoot and move and think tactically in the Arizona desert. Thought about Ryan Cole showing her how to survive in places where survival seemed impossible. Thought about the promise she'd made in Mosul to try being something other than a weapon. Teaching was keeping that promise. But this was amplifying it, taking what she'd learned through pain and loss and turning it into something that could protect thousands of people she'd never meet. Yes, she said, I'm ready. The week passed in a blur of classes and preparation. Elena refined her advanced tactics curriculum, ensuring every element demonstrated not just technique, but philosophy. The goal wasn't to create killers. The goal was to create survivors who understood when force was necessary and when it wasn't. Tuesday afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor. Staff Sergeant Torres walked into the training bay wearing civilian clothes and a wide grin. Vance, or should I say Instructor Vance. Elena felt genuine pleasure at seeing him. Torres had been one of the few people at Camp Pendleton who'd recognized what she was from the beginning. Torres, what are you doing at Quantico? Transition leave. Finished my 20 years last month. Came to see an old friend before I disappear into civilian life. They embraced briefly the kind of contact that would have been impossible 6 months ago when Elena was still locked in operational mode. How's retirement treating you? Terrifying. I have no idea what to do with myself when no one's shooting at me. Torres laughed. My wife keeps giving me honey-do lists just to keep me busy. You'll figure it out. That's what my therapist says. He looked around the training bay. This place suits you. Teaching. Building people up instead of tearing enemies down. It feels right. More right than anything has in a long time. Torres nodded. I heard about Mason. Marine Raider Pipeline. That's impressive. He earned it, did the work, transformed himself from the inside. Because you gave him a chance. Because you taught him instead of destroying him when you had every reason to. Elena thought about the mess hall, the assault, the 6 weeks of harassment, the moment when she'd chosen to help Mason instead of letting him fail. He made his own choices. I just showed him there were better options. That's what great teachers do. Torres pulled an envelope from his jacket. I brought you something. Found it when I was cleaning out my gear. Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph, faded, creased, clearly old. It showed a young woman in desert camouflage, standing with a group of operators in front of a mud brick compound. The woman's face was partially obscured by dust and shadow, but Elena recognized herself immediately. Mosul, the day before the siege. The last photo taken of the team before everything went wrong. Where did you get this? A buddy who worked the quick reaction force that extracted you. He'd kept it as a memento. When he heard I knew you, he asked me to pass it along. Torres paused. He wanted you to know that the people who came to get you, they never forgot what you did. Holding that compound for 4 days. Keeping everyone alive when all logic said you should have died. Elena stared at this photograph. She could name everyone in the frame. Could remember exactly what each of them had contributed to their survival. Could feel the weight of 96 hours pressing down on her shoulders. Ryan Cole stood at the center of the group, his arm around her shoulders, grinning like they were at a barbecue instead of a war zone. I think about him every day, she said quietly. Cole. He told me to find a line I wouldn't cross. Something that defined who I was beyond the operational requirements. Elena traced Cole's face in the photograph. I think this is it. Teaching. Passing forward what he taught me. He'd be proud of you. I hope so. Torres checked his watch. I should go. My wife's waiting at the hotel. We're doing the whole DC tourist thing tomorrow. Thank you for bringing this. For coming all this way. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like, not the loud, aggressive kind, the quiet kind that helps enemies become better people. Torres shook her hand. Take care of yourself, Vance, and keep changing lives. He walked out, leaving Elena alone with the photograph and the memories it carried. Commander Whitaker arrived on Friday morning. Elena met her at the main gate, feeling the strange mix of professional respect and personal history that characterized their relationship. Instructor Vance, you look well. Thank you, Commander. The work agrees with me. They walked toward the training facilities. Whitaker moved with the same quiet intensity Elena remembered from their operational days, the kind of presence that made people straighten their posture without knowing why. I've been reviewing your student evaluations, Whitaker said. Impressive results. Your classes consistently outperform the baseline metrics by significant margins. I have good source material. The methodologies I'm teaching came from people who knew what they were doing. People like Cole. Elena felt the name land in her chest. Yes, people like Cole. Whitaker was silent for a moment. Then she said, I was his handler too. Before he was assigned to your team, he used to talk about the kind of legacy he wanted to leave. What did he say? That the best operators weren't the ones who killed the most enemies. They were the ones who trained the most replacements, the ones who passed forward what they'd learned so the next generation could do it better. Elena thought about that. About Cole's patience during her training. About the way he'd explained things rather than simply demonstrating them. about his insistence that understanding mattered more than memorization. He practiced what he preached. He did, and now you're doing the same thing. Whitaker stopped walking and faced her directly. That's why I'm here. That curriculum development position I mentioned, it's not just about tactics, it's about philosophy, about shaping how we think about combat preparation at the institutional level. What exactly would it involve? Working with training commands across all services, developing standardized approaches to close quarters combat casualty care, and survival psychology. Creating frameworks that can be adapted to different operational environments. That's a massive undertaking. It is, which is why I need someone who understands both the tactical and the human elements, someone who can teach Marines how to fight, and also help them understand when fighting isn't the answer. Elena considered the scope of what Whitaker was proposing. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a fundamental shift in how she could impact the military. Why me? Because of what you did at Camp Pendleton. The assessment, no. Whitaker's voice softened. Mason. What you did with Mason. Elena frowned. I don't understand. You had a young man who'd assaulted you, who'd spent 6 weeks trying to destroy you, who represented everything broken about military culture's treatment of women. Whitaker paused. And instead of crushing him, which you could have done easily, you taught him. You gave him the tools to become better. You transformed an enemy into an ally. That wasn't strategic. It was just the right thing to do. Exactly. And that's why you're the right person for this role. Whitaker resumed walking. We don't need instructors who create followers. We need instructors who create leaders. People who can take someone like Mason and help them become the warrior they wanted to be, instead of the bully they were becoming. They reached the advanced tactics training bay. Elena's students were already warming up, preparing for the observation session. I want you to think about it, Whitaker said. The position wouldn't start for 6 months. You'd finish your current instructor rotation first, but I need an answer within the week. I'll consider it carefully. That's all I ask. Whitaker moved toward the observation area. Now show me what you've been teaching these Marines. The session lasted 2 hours. Elena ran her students through advanced defensive techniques, close quarters combat scenarios, and tactical decision-making exercises. She moved among them constantly, correcting form, explaining principles, challenging assumptions. Peterson, the skeptical kid from her first class, had become one of her best students. He partnered with a female Marine who was half his size and twice as fast, learning the hard way that assumptions about physical capability were often wrong. When the session ended, Whitaker approached Elena with something like satisfaction in her expression. Impressive. The methodology is sound, but more importantly, the philosophy is right. You're not just teaching them to fight. You're teaching them to think. That's what Cole taught me, that combat without thought is just violence. Combat with thought is survival. Whitaker nodded. Your answer. By end of week. She left without further ceremony, leaving Elena surrounded by exhausted students and unanswered questions. That night, Elena sat in her quarters and looked at the photograph Torres had given her. Cole's face smiled back at her, frozen in a moment before the siege, before everything changed. She thought about his words in that Mosul compound, about finding a line to hold, about being the person you wanted to be instead of the person circumstances demanded. For 7 years, circumstances had demanded she be a weapon, a tool for operations that couldn't be acknowledged, a ghost who moved through denied areas and did things that never appeared in any record. Then she'd tried to be nothing, a training liaison doing administrative work, someone who blended into the background and didn't attract attention. Both extremes had failed. The weapon couldn't function in normal society. The nothing couldn't honor what she'd learned and lost. But this teaching building transforming this was something new. Something that used everything she'd become without requiring her to keep becoming more of the same. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Whitaker. "I accept the position. Let's change how warriors are made." The reply came within minutes. "Welcome to the next chapter. Cole would be proud." Elena set down her phone and looked at the scar on her wrist. The crescent moon of tissue that marked the moment everything could have ended. She'd survived Mosul, survived Yemen, survived 96 hours in a building surrounded by enemies who wanted her dead. But survival wasn't the victory. The victory was what came after. The choice to use everything she'd learned to help others survive, too. She thought about Peterson, who'd walked in with assumptions and walked out with understanding. About Williams, who'd apologized and started questioning his choices. About Mason, who'd transformed from bully to leader because someone believed he could be better. That was the legacy worth building. Not body counts, not classified citations, not medals that couldn't be displayed. People. Changed lives. Warriors who understood that strength wasn't about domination, it was about protection, about service, about becoming better so others could become better too. Elena placed the photograph on her desk, Cole's smile facing her. A reminder of where she'd been and who she'd lost. Then she opened her laptop and began outlining the curriculum that would shape the next generation of American warriors. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton had been a place of humiliation. The training bay at Quantico had become a place of transformation. But the real victory wasn't about locations. It was about choices. About taking the worst moment of your life and turning it into the foundation for something meaningful. Derek Mason had called it her the real thing 6 months ago. He'd meant it as a recognition of her capabilities. But Elena understood now that being the real thing wasn't about what you could do. It was about what you chose to do with what you could do. She chose to teach, to build, to transform enemies into allies and skeptics into believers. She chose to keep the promise she'd made to a dead friend in a Mosul compound. And that choice made all the difference. The story of the mess hall assault would fade with time. The classified operations would remain forever sealed. But the students she trained would carry forward what she taught them. They would become instructors themselves someday. They would train the next generation who would train the generation after that. That was the real legacy. Not what she'd survived, but what she'd built from the survival. Elena Vance had walked into Camp Pendleton's mess hall as a ghost trying to disappear. She walked out of Quantico as something far more powerful, a teacher who transformed how warriors were made, one student at a time. And somewhere in whatever place heroes went when their work was done, Ryan Cole smiled. His promise had been kept.